Good evening. You are tuning in to Awani Tonight with me, Cynthia Ng. Labuan first to enter Phase 4 of National Recovery Plan. And will new government have more space for diversity? That's coming up. Effective Thursday, Labuan will become the first among states and territories to enter Phase 4 of the National Recovery Plan. Prime Minister Datuk Seri Ismail Sabri Yaakob said Negeri Sembilan, meanwhile, will move from Phase 1 to Phase 2 on the same day.
He said 92.4% of Labuan's adult population has been fully vaccinated, while daily COVID-19 cases has decreased to one digit consistently for 12 consecutive days. ICU usage for the territory has also decreased to 0 compared to 30% in the previous month. Labuan will enjoy the opening of all economic sectors with 100% employee capacity, subject to strict SOPs. As for Negeri Sembilan, 72.3% of its adult population are fully vaccinated, while ICU usage has dropped from 120% at the end of May to less than 40% yesterday.
Some fear that the gradual reopening of businesses might do more harm than good amid elevated number of COVID infections in the country. What is an effective management strategy to keep infections in check while providing clear guidelines for businesses to operate safely? We speak to public health specialist, Assistant Professor Dr. Muhammad Farhan Rusli.
There are no clear indicators to actually what is Phase 1, what is Phase 2, what is Phase 3. Because if I was in Phase 1, there is now no incentive for me to do anything because everything is allowed. I can go and cycle outside, I can go and jog, I can put everybody in the car, there's no 10-kilometer limit. I can go and dine in, I can go to the shopping mall and shop. There's no difference. So what's the difference between Phase 1 and Phase 2? So the moment you have this misguided principles that you don't base on data and science, but rather just based on the economy itself, then it's going to be very difficult for you to actually have a proper strategy in place. Now, another thing that we should highlight is the disability of the policy of the National Recovery Policy or Plan, where from Phase 1, you're in Phase 2, where the person from Phase 2 cannot go back to Phase 1. When you're in Phase 3, you can. So it doesn't go in backwards, it only goes in one direction. But what is that supposed to be telling to the people? Are you trying to tell the people that once you move to these phases, you will never go back? But then you would like to implement the stricter rules, targeted MCOs, or you would like to impose more restrictions, even though they're in Phase 4. So it's very unclear.
Dr. Farhan says that a more dynamic approach based on situations in states or localities would provide a clearer indicator in managing the spread of infections.
The first thing that should be done is to actually remove these phases, because the phases have no meaning whatsoever anymore, but rather you actually have what we call a dynamic recovery policy or plan that is dynamic according to the situation is in a current locality, state. When you approach this in a more sensible manner and you try to look at where the cases are actually coming from, then you will have a better guidance on what can actually be done in certain areas and what can actually be closed in certain areas. So, for example, when you look at states where you have a high number of cases stemming from perhaps dining in restaurants, perhaps in that area, you can stop dining in. You don't have to make the shops close, but rather you say that now the protocol is for you to take the food away.
As we wait for announcement of a new cabinet lineup this week, can the public expect a shake-up to include more diverse views and representation under Datuk Seri Ismail Sabri's government? We speak to UMNO Supreme Council member Datuk Seri Azalina Othman Said.
Of course, everybody is making a assumption that it must also be proportionate on gender base, especially the amount of women MPs plus with the voters, women voters. That is by virtue of some assumptions people make, but in reality, to get that out is also dependable on the coalition party, because the coalition party has got more say than any particular leadership of a single party. If it's a single party, it's much easier to sort out, but because it's a coalition party. So the party leaders must have that need or sensitivity or demand on, for example, an issue of whatever representation they're looking at. Yeah. It could be gender, it could be issue-based, it could be age-based, it could be state-based, I'm not sure. Because it's a coalition government. So Sabah and Sarawak also you have to evaluate. And last but not least, you have to take into account the numbers that comes from the independent bloc.
Azalina said the government must also recognize the need to communicate more effectively and to engage different segments of society, including netizens.
Because what happens today is that whichever movement of any policy made by government, say for example in the previous government, I see the response extremely on real time, and that affected a lot of secondary and the third level of steps taken. The narrative and the optics of any future government must be handled well. So the communication is very important, because government moved in various dimensions on COVID challenge, for example. When you face 2020 COVID challenge and the pandemic 2021, the expectation of government was different because the other countries were moving faster than us by 6 to 7 months. So there are a lot of things, a lot of decisions that they have made, the people have accepted. And the mistakes that they've made, we must learn. So we are like trailing behind, sort of maybe the middle ground, or maybe on the 40 to 50%, catching up to what they've done first. So these are strategies that if we are applying in our country, the policymakers must be extremely sensitive, that there must be a buy-in by the public. You cannot expect the public buy-in only during election. I think that's insulting the public.
Catch the full interview with Soraya Mia on Agenda Awani at astroawani.com.
Will a new government mean a new approach to governance? Tonight on Consider This, we ask our guests what they would like to see the new administration prioritize. The National Union of the Teaching Profession NUTP has called for the government to set up vaccination centres in selected schools specifically for students. The group said this measure would reduce the risk of students contracting COVID-19. In a statement today, NUTP Secretary General Wang Heng-Swan suggested that several schools be made into vaccination centres following the district or zone where children go to school. This, he added, will ease management of vaccination by stages and will track which child has yet to be vaccinated. On August 15, then Minister of COVID-19 Immunisation Programme, Khairi Jamaluddin, announced that vaccinations for all children aged 12 to 17 will start from September 15. We will go for a quick break. Stay with us. Welcome back. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris has called out China, accusing Beijing of coercing and intimidating other countries over its claims in the South China Sea. In her speech in Singapore, Harris sought to solidify Washington's pivot towards Asia and assured countries in this region that they will not have to choose between the U.S. and China. Harris took aim at Beijing's incursions into South China Sea and claims in the disputed waters on the final day of a 3-day visit to Singapore.
We know that Beijing continues to coerce, to intimidate, and to make claims to the vast majority of the South China Sea. These unlawful claims have been rejected by the 2016 Arbitral Tribunal decision. And Beijing's actions continue to undermine the rules-based order and threaten the sovereignty of nations. The United States stands with our allies and partners in the face of these threats.
Harris also condemned the violent repression occurring in Myanmar, referring to the military coup in February and subsequent suppression of protests. She is due to visit Vietnam after leaving Singapore later on Tuesday. Harris is on a week-long trip in Southeast Asia aimed at countering Chinese influence in the region. Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has agreed to be the ruling party's candidate for vice president in next year's election. Duterte is legally barred from seeking another term in office, and critics say he is seeking the second highest position to stay in power beyond his term. The PDP Laban Party made the announcement before a National Assembly on September 8th, where it is also expected to endorse Duterte's aide, Christopher Bongo, to be its presidential candidate in the 2022 elections. In the Philippines, the president is limited to one 6-year term, and Duterte's term is due to end by June next year. His vice presidential run is seen by political observers as a backdoor to the presidency. Duterte, who has portrayed himself as a reluctant president with no desire for power, has on several occasions said he wanted Go to be his successor. New Zealand recorded its highest increase in COVID-19 cases since April last year, with 41 new infections. This brings the total number of cases from the latest outbreak triggered by the Delta variant to 148 cases. New Zealand has been under a strict lockdown for a week, which is expected to last until at least Friday.
Auckland, where most of the cases have been found, will stay in lockdown until at least the end of the month. Director General of Health Ashley Bloomfield says most of the cases appeared linked and officials are not seeing an exponential rise in infections. Out of the 41 new community cases, 38 are from Auckland and 3 are from Wellington. The outbreak, the first in New Zealand in 6 months, has affected at least 7 schools and 2 universities.
The 2020 Paralympic Games kicked off in Tokyo this evening. The Games will be held at 21 venues involving 22 sports and a total of 539 events. Like the Olympics, most spectators are banned from Paralympics. Organizers said that they plan to implement the same COVID-19 protocols as the ones used during the Olympics, such as frequent testing and limiting the movement of athletes and officials. Japan's health situation has worsened since the Olympic Games ended on August 8th, with hospitals in Tokyo filled to capacity. While the number of athletes and officials traveling from abroad is less than a third of that during the Olympics, Japan reported more than 25,000 daily COVID-19 cases on 3 days last week, up from less than 15,000 when the Olympics ended earlier this month.
Alberto Abarza.
The Games will run until September 5th. That is all we have for you on Awani Tonight. Get the latest news updates on COVID-19 and COVID-19 vaccines from astroawani.com and Astro Awani app. I'm Cynthia Ng. Thank you for watching.